Here's today's recipe. Take a screenshot if you need it, or you can also find it on the cooking website.
Welcome back to Cooking with Miss Stockton. As you can see, today is pretzel day. For our recipe today, you are going to need 1.5 cups of flour, 2/3 of a cup of milk, a half a cup of shredded cheese. It calls for cheddar cheese, but you can use any kind of cheese you'd like. 2 tablespoons of butter softened, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a teaspoon of sugar, a teaspoon of salt, 1 egg, and if you'd like some coarse salt to put on top of your pretzels. So for this recipe, the first thing you'll need to do is preheat your oven to 400 degrees. My oven's being difficult. Okay. Next, you're going to need to take your baking pan. This is actually a jelly roll pan, but a jelly roll pan or a typical cookie sheet will do just fine for this. And then you want to line your pan with some parchment. If you don't have any parchment, you can just spray it with some cooking spray. That's absolutely fine, but it is really nice to have parchment paper. You can buy this in the grocery store right next to where you'd buy the plastic wrap or the wax paper. Good thing to invest in. All right, for your next step, you are going to mix together 1.5 cups of flour, and you want to make sure you have, again, the level cups, and you want to make sure you use dry measuring cups for this. 1.5 cups of flour, and I'm using all just regular all-purpose flour, but you could do a mix of whole wheat and all-purpose, or maybe all whole wheat, but it might be a little bit too much whole wheat. You're going to want to have 2/3 of a cup of milk, and for the milk you want to make sure again that you use a liquid measuring cup, because you can get a more precise measurement with a liquid measuring cup. Go right up to that line, and then generally you want to look at it at eye level on a counter. I have a pretty steady hand, so I'm usually fairly accurate with my measurements. Next, you're going to have 1/2 of a cup of shredded cheddar cheese. I happen to have some of this cheese in my refrigerator, so I'm just going to use that. Normally, I use a sharp cheddar. This is a good kind to use, just a 1/2 cup with a dry measuring cup.
Some top chefs encourage people to grate their own cheese from a block because what you buy pre-shredded from the store can be coated.
Next, you're going to want 2 tablespoons of butter softened, so you're going to want to let that sit out at room temperature until it softens. If you typically keep your butter in the refrigerator, you could substitute margarine, that would be just fine. Next, you're going to put in just for your baking powder, you're actually going to have 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and again, you want level teaspoons. So mine has a little leavener, or yeah.
Okay, baking powder is the leavener in this recipe. What makes it rise? You want to level your leavener. Say that 10 times fast.
2 teaspoons of the baking powder. Next, you're going to have 1 teaspoon of sugar, a huge container of sugar to get just 1 little teaspoon of sugar. 1 teaspoon of salt, which seems to be missing. I found the salt. And you're going to want to have 1 teaspoon of salt. With the salt, I'm going to measure it over a small bowl just to catch any sort of overflow, because you don't want extra. My butter is salted. Typically cook with unsalted butter. I buy salted butter, so sometimes I'm a little shy on my use of salt, a little bit less than what it calls for. You're not going to put the egg in here. You're looking on the recipe and it calls for an egg, but you're not going to put an egg in with the rest. So then you want to, using a fork, you want to mix all those ingredients together until they're just mixed. This isn't a case where you want to develop the gluten in the flour very much. So I'm going to mix just until it forms a ball. It's a slightly floury ball here, and then you're going to stop at that point. So sometimes my students have said they wanted pretzels that are a little bit more interesting to your palate. And so for these, I'm going to put in just a sprinkle of Italian seasonings just to see how that works. You could put a little bit of garlic salt. I'm just going to sprinkle that in. It smells delicious, kind of like a pizza. So you could try just a little bit of spice if you wanted. Experiment, have fun. Maybe try them just plain the first time, and next time go back and try a little experimentation your second time. For their next step, you're going to be kneading your dough just a few times and then rolling out your dough. So I'm going to turn out my dough onto a lightly floured surface. Could be your counter, could be a piece of wax paper, anything that will allow you to knead it just a little bit without letting it go into, say, cracks if you have a grouted countertop like I do. I have a little piece of marble here from an old bedside table that I use to roll out my dough because marble stays cold, and that typically is a little better for things like pie crusts and other doughs. So I'm gonna just form this into a little ball here. I'm mixing in some flour because it's just a little bit sticky. You're going to knead it 10 times. When you knead, what you're going to do is push with the heel of your hand and then turn the dough over. Push with the heel of your hand and then turn the dough over. Push with the heel of your hand, flip it over, push, turn, and if you find it getting a little too sticky, you can add just a little bit more flour to both your board that you are kneading on and to your dough itself, because you don't want it to be sticking to you. At the same time, you don't want to add too much flour because that would make it really dry. I'm sort of going to take away some of these kneaded up pieces so that when I go to roll out my dough, it won't stick. Then when you have your dough together, kneaded just a few times, you're going to take it and you're going to divide it in half. So you're going to have two roughly equal pieces of dough. Set one aside. With the remaining piece of dough, you're going to roll this into approximately an 8 by 12 inch rectangle. You don't need to measure it. It doesn't need to be exact. I like to sort of pre-form mine first before I start rolling it with my hands because I get a better rectangle. Typically what I do is I put a little bit of flour just right on top just so that my rolling pin doesn't stick. I do use a marble rolling pin. I got it at the flea market years ago. A little better buy there. And I'm going to use that to roll out my dough. And as I roll, I can sort of help it along. Oh, it's starting to stick a little. Should have floured my surface a little more. So that's a good call to you to make sure that you flour your surface adequately, and also make sure that you don't have any dough sticking to it because your dough may stick more. So I'm gonna restart here. It's good that you saw this so you'll know one of the potential sticking points. My dough's a little bit floury now, but it should still work. I'm gonna knead it a little bit more, which is gonna activate the gluten just a bit more, but hopefully they'll still taste delicious. So I'm gonna again sort of pre-form that into what looks something like a rectangle, and then use my rolling pin to roll that out into the 8.5 inch approximately rectangle. Oh, starting to stick again. Okay, here we go, little dough. Let's put a little bit of flour on you. Okay. So it's approximately the size of a piece of binder paper. You can think, does it look kind of like a piece of binder paper? And once you've got it to about that size, you can stop. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take a butter knife. You're going to cut that dough right in half. And then with each of those, you're going to cut each of those pieces right in half. And then, one more time, you're going to cut each of those pieces right in half. And then with each of those pieces, you're going to form what looks like a snake. You can just fold it over once. That's what the recipe actually calls for. Or you can gently roll it into a snake-like pattern. You're going to do this with all 8 pieces of your dough. All right, so your next step is to form your pretzel shape. So I've got my snakes here. So I like to make one loop and then a second loop, and then I like to twist my loops over so you get something that looks like a pretzel, and then I go ahead and transfer that to my baking sheet. You're going to repeat that with all the rest of your pieces. The next step is to take your remaining ball of dough and repeat the same process that you did for the first set of pretzels. After you have all of your pretzels on your cookie sheet, and if you need to use more than one cookie sheet, or as this is, jelly roll pan, you need to prepare your egg wash. And to do that, what you're going to do is take an egg and you're going to crack it into a small bowl, and then use a whisk. You don't have to have a mini whisk like I have. It's kind of fun. A student gave this to me years ago. So you can whisk up that egg. Any size whisk will do, or even a fork is just fine. And then after you have your egg wash whisked up, you're going to take a brush and you are going to brush each one of those pretzels with a little bit of egg wash. Now, if you don't have a pastry brush, what you could do, you could substitute a really clean paintbrush. Make sure it doesn't have any, scary paint on it. Or you could just use your finger, clean hands as a substitute. That would work as well. Just experiment if you don't have it. Find something that'll work. All the pioneers made pretzels and they didn't necessarily have a pastry brush with them in their covered wagons. So experiment, figure it out, you can do it. A final step, and this is optional, is if you happen to have some coarse salt, I call mine pretzel salt, you can take that, these are large granules of salt, and you can sprinkle some on each of your pretzels. Be mindful if you have someone with high blood pressure in your family, you might want to take it easy on the salt. Other than that, it can be quite delicious, but again, use sparingly. You can always add more, but it's hard to take it away. Coarse salt can be delicious.
You're going to bake your pretzels for about 20 to 25 minutes in that 400-degree oven.
When your pretzels come out of the oven, you can put them they should come off the parchment really easily, onto a plate. My family likes them with mustard or hot sauce, or maybe even a little bit of hummus. Enjoy, they are delicious.